Break down the court rulings and look ahead to what they may mean for the future. I am really happy to bring on an all-star panel. Richard Socarides is a former senior advisor to President Clinton and a contributor to NewYorker.com. Suzanne Goldberg is a Columbia Law School professor and director of the school's Center for Gender and Sexuality Law. And Tico Alameda is a founder and president of Freedom to Work, which fights workplace and career discrimination against LGBT people. And Tico looks crushed over this news. Okay, let's be. Suzanne, it's your first time on the program. Let me start with you. You wrote today that the court's decisions gave a 1-2 punch to the nation's most prominent anti-gay laws. So what did the court accomplish with these rulings, and in striking down DOMA in particular?
Well, the court accomplished a great deal. It removed the part of DOMA that blocked the federal government from recognizing same-sex couples' marriages. So this means that legally married couples, couples who are married in states that allow same-sex couples to marry, can have their marriages recognized by the federal government. Of course, it's not the end of the line for marriage discrimination, but it's an enormous step forward.
Richard and Tico, I want to invite you to weigh in on this as well. How significant would you judge today's ruling?
Well, you know, I think that to me the most striking thing was the very emotional and sweeping language of the majority opinion in the Defense of Marriage Act case. I mean, it was close 5-4, but here are 5 justices of the United States Supreme Court really affirming on behalf of the whole country the dignity of gay and lesbian relationships and setting forth a constitutional standard under which, going forward, it will be very hard to justify any kind of discrimination against gay Americans.
And Tico?
It was a historic win, a win for all Americans, and what I love most is that within half an hour of the Supreme Court decision, we already saw a concrete example of how gay and lesbian families are kept together by this huge victory. An immigration case out of New York Immigration Court already prevented the deportation of a gay Colombian man who is legally married to a New Yorker because of this decision. The immigration judge got the 77-page decision in front of him. He stopped that deportation. This is going to have huge impacts for real American families, gay families, that have long been harmed by this odious, disgusting law.
I think Tico's right. I think the ripple effects of this are going to continue to just expand over the weeks to come. And Richard, we've talked before on the show about what it was like in 1996 with President Clinton. Now, back then, those of us who opposed DOMA were called liberal. Turns out we were just prematurely mainstream. But you were there in the White House when it was signed into law by the president. And as you wrote today, back then it really had no practical effect because there were no states that recognized marriage equality. So how much damage did DOMA do to American citizens over the past 17 years?
Well, as you point out, when it was enacted in 1996, it had no practical effect because you couldn't be married anywhere. But over time, as more and more states adopted same-sex marriage, Massachusetts being the first one, but you know, we've rapidly seen more and more in the last couple of years, the damage that this was, the discrimination that this was doing to real people and the misery it was causing became very apparent. And I think the law, in fact, was very unpopular. And that is one of the reasons why the Supreme Court probably was able to so dramatically strike it down.
Suzanne, I'm sure you agree when the Republican senator who helped design this law disowns it himself earlier this year. Were you surprised that the court overturned it, and how damaging do you think it's been?
I think the law has been tremendously damaging, and I wasn't surprised that the court overturned DOMA, but I was a little bit surprised and very heartened by the language the court used, because it really got it. It got the problem. It talked about DOMA demeaning the relationships of same-sex couples, humiliating the children of same-sex couples who are married but their parents aren't able to have their marriages recognized. It talked about DOMA being degrading. So what we have is the court not only getting it and striking the law down as a violation of equality, but also embracing the idea that same-sex couples' marriages are and should be of equal dignity.
You know, I really think that is once again, as Suzanne often does, that is really the key point here. You know, the court could have very easily said, as the court often does, well, you know, it seems to violate this or violate that, and you know, you can't do that. But the court really went out of its way, again, using very emotional language, very affirming language, to say not that this was just, you know, improper, but that this was really degrading and demeaning and really not what this country was about. It was as much a political statement as it was the enunciation of a new legal doctrine.
I agree. I was a bit impressed by how emphatic it was. And Tico, ACLU Director Anthony Roberts said that the DOMA case in particular was going to have a ripple effect as plaintiffs filed to knock down same-sex marriage laws across the country. It seems that we're on the verge of a great rainbow-colored domino effect. Now, Justice Scalia seemed more unhinged than usual at that possibility. Do you think the courts established precedents today that's going to invalidate some of those state laws too?
Well, let me say first that I was in such a good mood today that I specifically chose not to read the Scalia opinion. I'm saving it for tomorrow because I didn't want that bigot to bring down my mood today.
You know what? If you read it, it'll get your heart rate up so much it counts as cardio.
That's tomorrow.
Okay.
In terms of the ripple effect, here's one concrete example. This Supreme Court decision is going to lower taxes for gay couples. And maybe that's the hook to get Republicans to calm down about gay marriage. If you are a same-sex couple, and if your employer provides you health care coverage for your legally married same-sex spouse, right now, while DOMA is still in effect, you have a higher tax burden than an equivalent straight couple. You've got to pay taxes on that employer-provided health care. 25 days from now, when DOMA is truly and finally dead, that goes away. That we get a tax savings for healthcare provided benefits, and really across the board, there are more than 1,000 rights and obligations in the federal U.S. Code related to marriage, and in countless ways, gay and lesbian families are going to be far better off in terms of our pocketbooks and in terms of just having a law and a U.S. Code that affirms our love for each other, and that's really the most important thing.
It's truly inspiring, and it is worth pointing out that one of the judges who voted to uphold DOMA is in a marriage that itself would have been illegal only a few short decades ago. And before we go, I want to ask all of you, can you foresee a day in the not-too-distant future when same-sex marriage ceremonies will be legal and held in all 50 states? And if not, given today's ruling, what's the law that could hold them back? Suzanne?
It will happen. It's not happening tomorrow.
In our lifetimes?
I think so.
Mississippi?
Yes. Absolutely. I don't think necessarily by virtue of the Mississippi legislature, but I do think that the nation is, the arc bends toward equality, as Martin Luther King said. Unfortunately, what we saw this week is that, the Supreme Court doesn't always get it. It hasn't gotten it on race discrimination. It hasn't gotten it on many issues, employment discrimination, among others. But the arc does bend toward equality, and we will get there. It will be some mix of legislatures and courts, but who would have thought that there would be marriage for same-sex couples in Iowa, and it was one of the early states.
Exactly right.
So there you go.
Richard, you get the last word.
Well, definitely in our lifetime, unless you're planning on going somewhere.
Utah?
Rather quickly. But I think that what you saw in the David Boies comment that you played was that now plaintiffs, either in courts across America and all of these states, are going to go forward and say, based upon this decision today, we have a right to same-sex marriage in all these other states. Now, it's going to take a while to work its way through the courts, but I will bet you in 5 years from today, same-sex marriage legal in all 50 states.
Wow. Okay, Tico, I'll give you the last word. Do you think Richard's right? Can we hope for this in all 50 states in 5?
I hope Richard is right, but even before that, we're going to pass through Congress the LGBT Freedom to Work Act that prevents you from getting fired just because you're gay or just because you're transgender. That's going to happen in a year or two. That's going to be a huge victory, and it's going to set us up for even further marriage victories. Equality begets equality. When we make one victory, we lead to other victories, and that's the next big one.
It's a day straight and gay people will tell their grandkids about, and what's hipper than having gay grandparents. Richard Socarides, former senior advisor to President Clinton and contributor to TheNewYorker.com. Suzanne Goldberg, Columbia Law School professor and director of the school's Center for Gender and Sexuality Law. Thank you for joining us for the first time. And the great Tico Almeida, founder and president of Freedom to Work. Thank you all so much for coming on Viewpoint to discuss this momentum Supreme Court ruling. It's a pleasure to share this day with you all. And up next, we're going to